Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine. And we have a great program for you this afternoon featuring veteran journalist Chris Wallace, here to talk with Jay Winik about Chris's new book, Countdown bin Laden, the Untold Story of the 247-day hunt to bring the mastermind of 9/11 to justice. A couple of brief housekeeping notes first, though. There won't be a chance to ask questions during the discussion, but in the chat column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of Countdown bin Laden. Chris, of course, is one of America's most prominent, most accomplished broadcast journalists with a well-earned reputation for being independent-minded and for conducting tough interviews. For the past 18 years, he's been at Fox, where he anchors Fox News Sunday, and before that, he worked at NBC and ABC. Last year, Chris came out with his first book, Countdown 1945, which chronicled the 116 days during which Harry Truman ascended to the presidency and decided to drop atomic bombs on Japan. The title of that book, Chris said at the time of its publication, was chosen because Chris thought it could be replicated, and indeed, it has been with his new book. And like the previous book, Countdown bin Laden provides a vivid, engaging, fast-paced account of a major historical event. This time, it's the story of the hunt for the al-Qaeda leader, starting in August 2010, when then CIA Director Leon Panetta learned from his staff about a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where bin Laden might be living, to May 2011, when members of a Navy SEAL team killed the notorious terrorist. On this, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, Chris's book, of course, has particular resonance, and we're very excited to have him with us. As an added attraction, we also have moderating, as I mentioned above, Jay Winik, who is himself a best-selling writer of histories, including April 1865, as well as The Great Upheaval in 1944. Jay will come on in a minute, but first, Chris, the screen is yours.
Brad, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. I've always wanted to do an event for Politics and Prose. Lord knows I've been there enough times just before Christmas to get a bunch of books for members of the family, old and kids. I've been in the coffee shop and had a bite to eat or drink. I'm sorry that we're doing this on Zoom, but next time, if I do have another replicable Countdown book, hopefully we can all be gathering up there on Connecticut Avenue and do it in person there. If you're wondering what's going on behind here, I said I would explain it to Brad. We have just reopened our bureau, which had been coincidentally with COVID under a major renovation here at Fox. And all of my boxes, which have been in storage, are now in this new office. What you're seeing behind there, I don't know why I have it, but I have a big replica of a FedEx freighter plane. So I don't know, my grandkids like it, so it'll be on a wall or on a ledge somewhere here. I thought I would talk briefly about the book and then, get to what I know will be a fascinating conversation with Jay Winik. And to a certain degree, he's responsible for my whole Countdown series, because the book that Brad mentioned, April 1865, I just loved. And it's, for those of you who have not had the chance to read it yet, and I highly recommend it, it's about the first 2 weeks in April of 1865 when Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox. You have the major speech by Abraham Lincoln, and then he goes to Ford's Theater as assassin and is assassinated. And all of this is told these 2 weeks in vivid, almost novelistic detail. And I remember thinking I would love to find an event like that and not tell it as dusty history, but almost as a reporter on the scene. And my first book, Countdown 1945, as Brad mentioned, about Truman becoming president, learning for the first time on the day he becomes president on April 12, 1945, about the existence of the Manhattan Project, and then his efforts to decide whether or not to use the bomb, the scientists at Los Alamos trying to figure out whether in fact the bomb will actually work, and then the fighter crew, the crew of the Enola Gay, which is going to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, and doesn't know, because it's never been dropped in a battle, whether or not it will simply blow them out of the sky. Well, that book seemed to do pretty well, and people liked it. And, I was looking for another one. The one frustration I had, and I guess this shows a little bit of the difference between being a historian and a reporter, was that throughout the process of researching 1945, and I had all the history books, and I had the memoirs, and I had diaries, and I had letters, and by the way, Truman wrote wonderful diaries throughout this entire period every day, is I so much wanted to ask them, what were you thinking? What was going on? What were you scared of? How did you make that decision? How did that meeting go? And of course, they were all gone. I couldn't do it. And so I was kind of intrigued at the thought of bin Laden. And you remember the famous picture, I'm sure you've all seen it, of Obama in the Situation Room with his team, Hillary Clinton with her hand to her mouth, as the SEALs are raiding the compound. And I thought, I know most of those people. I bet I can get access to those people. And over the course of months, I interviewed almost everyone. Hillary Clinton, Bob Gates, Leon Panetta, top people at the White House like Tom Donilon and John Brennan, Admiral William McRaven is the head of Joint Special Operations Command, some of his top commanders, and then two members of SEAL Team 6 who actually went into Abbottabad, into the compound, including Rob O'Neill, the man who killed bin Laden, and got to ask him all those questions that I didn't get to ask the people in 1945. And, I think that my timing was right. There were a lot of books that were written right after the bin Laden raid when things were still highly classified, so there were limits there. This is 10 years later. Things are not as secret. I think a lot of these people that I was talking to were justifiably proud of the role they played and wanted a complete record and wanted to be part of it. And as a result, I talked to some people who had never talked before, especially a fellow named, we call him Gary in the book. He was the head of the Pakistan-Afghan department and really the case officer in charge of trying to find bin Laden. And once they had the compound, trying to make sure that bin Laden was really there. So, I call it a history thriller. And I hope when people read it that, they begin on August 27th, 2010, when these three case officers go to Panetta and say, we've got the best lead we've had in 9 years about where bin Laden may be, through the CIA efforts, through the meetings in the White House, through the SEALs, training, rehearsing over and over again, and then the actual raid. And the best compliment I've had is people say, I know how the story ends, but for the last 100 pages, I was on the edge of my seat wondering what happens next. And if that's the way readers receive it, then I did what I tried to do. In any case, I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you so much for linking in. And with that, Jay Winik, I'm delighted to invite you into the conversation.
Great to be here. Chris, I went back and I looked at what I said about Countdown 1945, because as you know, I reviewed it in the New York Times. And I wrote that it was, and I'm going to tell you here, superb, masterly, riveting, and fascinating. I do a lot of reviewing, and it's not often I use adjectives like that. And I would equally apply what I said about Countdown 1945 to your Countdown bin Laden. For me, it reads like a Ken Follett thriller. I just love the detail. We see what the characters ate, what they thought, what their mood was, what their feelings were, what their fears and what their hopes were. It's really just a remarkable insight into the inner world and inner workings of those making policy and executing it. Now, having said that, my question for you is, what was your process for writing the book?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. Secondly, you gave me a great review in the New York Times, which I treasure and have in a scrapbook. And I'm a little disappointed you're not doing the review for this book, because I would very much like to have had you say that in the pages of the New York Times. well, first of all, to a certain degree, because I've got this countdown format, which very much follows the chronology, is that I knew the end point. It was May 1st when I did the raid. I had to figure out the start point. And in the course, there had been history books written. And interestingly enough, many of the key players had written memoirs, but they were about their entire career. So they only had one chapter, most of them. And I include Gates and Panetta and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in that. So they didn't go into nearly as much detail. But reading all of those, it became clear to me that the start point is when these three members of the Counterterrorism Center at the CIA come to see Panetta on August 27th and say, we need to have a private meeting with you in your office. And they proceed to tell him about this guy. There were three ways that the CIA thought of trying to find bin Laden. One was family. That didn't work. Other was other al-Qaeda operatives, and they captured a bunch of them, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and they didn't give anything up. And the third was couriers, because they figured there's no way, wherever bin Laden is, and they thought he was in a cave in the tribal area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there was no way they thought that he's doing anything in electronic communication that would leave that kind of a footprint. So they figured there was a great likelihood that he was communicating with his Confederates by the old-fashioned way, a courier, that he would hand him a note, and the courier would take that, and somehow it would end up with a more operational person from al-Qaeda. And over the course of time, they came up with the name of this one guy who had been a courier pre-9/11 named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. That was his nom de guerre in al-Qaeda. And we can go into it if you want, but they ended up being able to find him in Pakistan, in Peshawar, a major city, and to trace him back. And they found that he kept going back to this mysterious compound in what they called a fortress in Abbottabad. And interestingly enough, when they mentioned the name Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti to Panetta was in his office with these three operatives, but also there was his deputy director, Michael Morrell, and Jeremy Bash, his chief of staff. And Panetta looks over at the two of them, like, you know who he's talking about? And they all shook their heads. They had no idea who this al-Kuwaiti guy was. And it goes on from there. So in terms of the process, you kind of have an outline, not that you know what the key moments are going to be, but you know you're going to start at this point, August 27th and of 2010, and you're going to end on May 1st. And now you've got to find out what were the key points, what were the key meetings. And then one of the other challenges, and you know this well, you're telling a story in almost present tense. But on the other hand, you do have to layer in some background. You have to layer in background of the events that led up to this moment, what the hunt for bin Laden had been over that time. You have to layer in the characters and their backgrounds and their experiences and how they come to this moment. And as you know, it's a very delicate balance between giving the reader what he needs to be interested and engaged and informed to follow the story, but not burying him in details that get him off the drive of the narrative. And I have to say, that was one of the tough things. Then you just interview everybody. And I purposely started, like as you do in an investigative report, with some of the people that I thought were more likely to talk and frankly would have more time, and got them to tell more expansive stories. And then, you build up your body of knowledge. So by the time you get to the key players who you're going to have less time with, you're much more focused on, I need to know this detail. I need to know what happened here. And frankly, when you go into them and you're not saying, so what happened in the meeting of April 28th, but when you say to them, so when Panetta said to you, Secretary Clinton, this is ridiculous, and you said to him, go jump in a lake. In other words, you are armed with so much stuff, they know that you are really well versed, and they're more likely to come clean to you.
Now in your last book, you dealt virtually with all, well, not virtually, with all dead people. In this book, virtually everyone you're dealing with is alive. Were there any, you're talking about some of the benefits of speaking to those who are alive participants, but were there any pitfalls in dealing with live people?
Yes, there's a certain amount of feathering your nest, and I will tell you that after I had written the book, well, there were two problems. One is, and this was very interesting, because this was so closely held. To give you a sense, after Obama gets briefed for the first time on September 10th, 2010, one day shy of the 9th anniversary of 9/11, he says and he's briefed by the CIA people, and it's in the Oval Office. So the only people there are Panetta and a few of his top aides, and Obama and a few of his White House people like Donnellan and Brennan. And he says, let me make it clear, this stays with us. And what he specifically meant is, I do not want the Secretary of Defense briefed. I do not, Bob Gates. I do not want the Secretary of State briefed, Hillary Clinton, who wasn't briefed until the following March, because they knew they didn't know if it was true, but they knew it was the best lead they'd had in 9 years. And they were terrified that somehow if it leaks, that if bin Laden, and it's an if, but if bin Laden is there, he's just going to disappear into the night and the lead is gone. So operational security was enormously important on the part of this team. The bad side of that is the normal staffing, the normal timelines that would be done weren't done in this case. For instance, when Hillary Clinton is read in March, she is told by Panetta, you cannot tell anybody on your staff. You can't when you come to the White House for a meeting, you have to make up a story as to why you're coming. Some of the people had it on their calendar, Mickey Mouse meeting, literally, and they have security surveillance cameras in the Situation Room. They were blocked, they were capped, so nobody could see what was going on in the Situation Room. And the flip side of that, from a historian's point of view, is there's not such a good record. And I remember at one point talking to Bill McRaven, and I said, one of my problems here, and he was one of the latter people I spoke to, is I've talked to 10 or 12 or 15 people, and somebody will say, well, this happened on March 14th, and others will say, no, this happened on March 29th. And he said, let me just say, if there's any contradiction between the timeline I give you and what anybody else says, take their version of it, because I was too busy doing the job to keep an accurate record. And in fact, on many of the key events that he was part of, he was wrong about when it happened.
That's pretty amazing if you think about it. So explain why this culture of secrecy was just so crucial. Because if we think about it, leaving out the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and on down the line, that's a pretty dramatic, pretty far-reaching step, it seems to me.
Well, it is. That came from one person, Barack Obama. I mean, he made it absolutely clear. And as late as December, remember, the original tip comes in August. He's first briefed in September. And in December, he continues to say to Panetta, I do not want anybody else brought into this. Now, the interesting thing is, and from reading the book, Panetta on his own decides to disobey the president and to brief some people. First of all, he briefs the top members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. At that point, they were both run by Democrats, because he says, I gave a pledge to Congress when I was confirmed as CIA director that I would keep them abreast to every key operation. And he also says, I needed money. This was expensive to do. And if I'm going to be repurposing funds, they need to know where the money goes. He also, even though he was told don't brief the Pentagon, he did, in fact, brief Gates and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mike Mullen, because he thought at some point this is going to become, if it happens, a military operation, and I don't want them at ground zero. Having said that, on March 4th of 2011, there's a meeting of the deputies. It's not the top people. It's not the secretaries of the departments, but it's people like Tom Donnellan and Panetta. And at one point, Donnellan says, we probably should start briefing the intel committees. And Panetta says, I did that months ago. And Donnellan is not pleased.
He exploded.
We describe it in the book as his face was like thunder. And these two guys start exchanging F-bombs and are really mad. And at one point, he says, why the hell did you do that? The president told you not to. And Panetta says, because, they need to be briefed on things that we're planning and intelligence that we're gathering. And Donilon says there's nothing to brief them on because the president hasn't decided to take any action. This is not there's no operation here. It's simply intelligence. And one of the people in the room said, and this is with the advantage of interviewing people that you wouldn't have gotten in a memoir or a diary, said, I felt like I was watching Godzilla versus King Kong, these two super operatives in Washington, Panetta and Donilon, and all I wanted was the popcorn.
Now, who was right, Godzilla or King Kong? In this,
well, in the end, you'd have to say, I don't know who was right in terms of decision. I suppose you're not supposed to countermand the president, but the fact is that Panetta briefed all these people, and more interestingly, after the midterms in 2010, Republicans took over the intelligence committees. Remember the big victory of the Tea Party in 2010, and Mike Rogers, a Republican from Michigan, ends up becoming the chairman of House Intel, and Panetta invites him, a Republican, over to the CIA and briefs him on the entire thing, and not a word of it ever leaked. So maybe Donilon was right in terms of procedure, but in terms of any leaking of the operation, any break in security, Panetta was right.
Now, it's obviously a great get that you were able to interview all these players who are so highly ranked within the government. I guess one question that I have as a result of that is who, if anyone, stands out as a hero in this saga, in this drama?
Well, I think there are maybe 4 stars in this book. Panetta, definitely. Panetta was just a force of nature for, I'm sure, a lot of the folks watching now either know him or know of him. He's this big, larger-than-life Italian, tough as nails, but great emotions, quick to laugh, quick to drop F-bombs, and he really just kept the hammer on the CIA to keep developing information. There's one wonderful moment in the fall of 2010, as he's getting frustrated because they don't have, they have circumstantial evidence. They got the Courier and they got all the secret operational stuff going on in the compound, but they can't put bin Laden there. And at one point, just to give you an example, this guy keeps coming out of the house every day and walking in a circle in this vegetable patch next to the main house, and they call him the pacer because he's pacing like a pacer in a prison yard. And they have, from drones and satellites, they have visuals of this guy. And at one point, Panetta says, because he knows that bin Laden is 6'4", he says to the National Geospatial Agency, hey, you guys are smart, do a computer analysis and figure out if this guy's 6'4". And they come back and they say, well, we've done our analysis, very technical. He's somewhere between 5'8" and 6'8", which is obviously means it's completely useless as a piece of intelligence. But at various points, he's really putting the pressure on the operatives to try to get information. And he admitted to me with a little bit of a laugh. He said, at one point I'm talking to them, I'm pressing them, and he said, can you do this? Can you do that? And he says, look, I've seen the movies. The CIA can do this in the movies. And the agents are a little bit like, this isn't the movies, director. So I think he's definitely one of the heroes. Admiral Bill McRaven, Captain America. Obama said about him that if they made a movie of this, he would be the star and he would play himself. I just think so cool, so orderly, so calm. He's the head of. Interestingly enough, he was the perfect man for this because when he was in graduate school, he went to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and he literally wrote the book on special operations. He did as a postgraduate thesis, a study of commando raids, starting with Hitler ordering the glider rescue of Mussolini in World War II and continuing to the Entebbe raid to free Israeli hostages from Uganda. And he said there really are four things that are key: surprise, speed, repetition, and purpose. And what he meant is that if you have these things, if it's a complete surprise and you pull it off fast and you have completely rehearsed it over and over and over again, and then you have just this driving and very keen sense of purpose, a smaller group can overwhelm a larger group and accomplish their mission. And this is a perfect example of that. The Navy SEAL, Rob O'Neill, I mean, you could say it about any of the Navy SEALs, but he's the man who actually went up and got bin Laden. And, I asked him at one point, how dangerous did you think this mission was? And he said, one-way ticket. And I said, excuse me? And he said, no, suicide mission. We were not coming back. He said, look, if bin Laden is there, he's going to have the place booby-trapped. And as soon as we hit the ground or hit the roof of the main house, it's going to blow up. And if that doesn't happen, once we get in the house and are making our way upstairs, he's going to be surrounded by bodyguards who are going to have all kinds of weapons and RPGs and hand grenades, and they'll take us out. And he said, we figured we were going to die, but if we could take out bin Laden, it was worth it. And I'll never forget this. He said, I'm doing this for the woman who went to work on 9/11 and was working at the World Trade Center and went up to work at the 90th floor, and at some point is looking out the window and it's 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit inside the Trade Center because the plane is hit and it's now an inferno. And I decide to jump out. She decides to jump out the window because that's the better alternative. He said, I'm doing this for her. And then finally, Barack Obama. And he was really the one key figure I did not get to talk to for the book. His people said he's written a memoir, and I took it from that. But I don't think you can overstate. There are a few things about him that really impressed me. One was the meticulousness of the process. At one point, his national security advisor, Tom Donilon, said to me, good process does not guarantee good policy, but bad process absolutely guarantees bad policy. And we, as I mentioned, how closely held this is, and without the normal staffing, that we were determined that this was going to be good process. And they had 17 meetings at various levels, the deputy level, the principal level, the National Security Council, 17 meetings between March and April. And in the end, they have a meeting on April 28th in the Situation Room. This is the meeting where he's going to get his final input from everybody. And, various people are ascribing various percentages. It's 40% likelihood that bin Laden is there. It's 80%. And at one point, he says to Mike Morrell, the deputy director of the CIA, explain this to me. Why these different percentages? And Morrell says, Mr. President, it isn't that the guy with 80% has more information than the person who says it's 40%. Everybody is working off the same information. It's based on what their experience has been. Bob Gates had been a veteran of the failed rescue mission for the Iranian hostages in 1980, Operation Eagle Claw, when the Desert One, this place in the middle of the desert, the helicopters and the transport planes crashed into each other and Americans were killed. They never rescued any hostages, and it probably cost Jimmy Carter his presidency. He didn't want to go on the raid, so that was his experience in the way of viewing it. Other people had, like McRaven, had a decade worth of very successful raids against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and so they had a much higher confidence in this. But at one point, and I'll never forget this, it's interesting. I say I'll never forget this because talking to them, you feel like you're in the room with them. Morrell turns to the president and he says, let me just say, the information, the level of confidence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction before we invaded Iraq was greater than the evidence and that bin Laden is in that compound. And everybody in the Situation Room just gasped because, he's saying that one of the great intel screw-ups of all time was that likelihood was greater than the likelihood of this operation. And Obama says to him, so are you saying, Michael, you wouldn't do it? And he says, no, I would do it, because this is, whether you think it's 40% or 60 or 80%, it is the best lead we've had on bin Laden since he escaped from Tora Bora in 2001. And he said, frankly, if I had a guy, an informant, who said, I had breakfast in the compound with bin Laden this morning, he said, I would not attach 100% confidence to that, because informants get things wrong all the time. So based on all of that, and all of that different information, and Biden's against it, and Gates is against it, and Mullen is for it, and Hillary Clinton is for it, Obama says, guys, forget these percentages. It's 50-50. He's either there or he's not there. And he says, I'll tell you in the morning. He goes upstairs to the family quarters, has dinner with Michelle and the girls, goes to the treaty room, which was his office on the second floor, puts on a Los Angeles Lakers basketball game against the Charlotte Hornets, eats his few almonds, and decides to go. And I will tell you that when he tells Donilon the next morning, and the word is relayed to McRaven, who's going to be commanding the operation from Jalalabad, the base of Special Operations Command in Eastern Afghanistan, McRaven says, wow, that is a gutsy decision. He was not at all sure he was going to do it. So Obama is definitely one of the heroes.
You know, I just want to give the listeners and the readers a little sense of what a decision like this means and how hard it is. If we look at FDR in World War II, on the morning of D-Day, the normally unflappable president was so anxious and was so nervous that when he received a phone call from George Marshall to brief him on the status of the invasion, his hand actually shook. So it's just a way of thinking about how difficult these presidential decisions are. One other question that I was rolling around in my mind is, it was not inevitable that we would find bin Laden, was it? And if we didn't find him, what would that have meant for peace and stability within the region and in the war on terror?
Well, no, as I say, it was a 50-50 possibility that he was in that compound. They were very much prepared for the possibility that, and remember, I mean, what we're talking about here, and this is why this was so high stakes. I mentioned the fact that McRaven would oversee a dozen of these raids a night, but they were in Afghanistan. We're talking now about 2 helicopters taking off from Afghanistan, crossing the border, going into Pakistani airspace, flying 162 miles to Abbottabad, basically invading Pakistan, telling the Pakistani authorities absolutely nothing, carrying out this raid, which may bring down bin Laden, may not. It may do nothing, may end up in the deaths of all the SEALs as they kind of anticipated or not, and then come back. One of the reasons that Gates and Biden were against it was not just that they weren't convinced that bin Laden was there, but Pakistan was an important but a very uncertain and difficult ally. But the fact was that we were depending on them and the Khyber Pass as a supply route for U.S. supplies getting through Pakistan into Afghanistan to help us fight the war against the Taliban. And it was fully expected that if we invaded, whether we got bin Laden or not, we were very much risking that supply route into Afghanistan.
Can you tell us about these SEALs, this special brotherhood of men who were putting so much on the line? And, when you say that it was a suicide mission, or they felt it was a suicide mission, that's not very common, is it? That our leaders send men and women into battle, knowing that it means certain death.
Well, yeah, not certain, but certainly likely. And they did know that. And this was an insanely qualified and tough and experienced group of SEALs. I mean, SEALs are SEALs. So, the weakest SEAL, I don't think, Jay, either you or I would want to take on. But this was the best of the best. This was SEAL Team 6. They had gone through SEAL Team training, and then they've gone through special DevGru training on underwater demolition, all kinds of things. to become the elite unit. And a bunch of them they had just come back, a number of them from Afghanistan, and only 24 were called back. They were all off. Some of them, Rob O'Neill was down in Miami because for this underwater demolition groups, Navy SEALs, they were doing all their fighting in a landlocked country, Afghanistan. So they needed to get back in the water and retrain in those skills. And suddenly they're called back from what's supposedly training, but they were having a good time in Florida, back to their headquarters in Virginia Beach, and they're told absolutely nothing about this. And a lot of people are cut out. So there's just these 24 people, and they're the ones that go to a secret CIA facility in North Carolina for the final briefing. And they have a briefing, and then they had set up a kind of replica of the compound, and they immediately went out and started doing all kinds of training and rappelling from helicopters. And it wasn't a full building. It was the packing crates and the shape and the conformation of the building. So they were doing that, and then they finally advanced and did a full-scale rehearsal in the desert in Nevada. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, goes out there for that. And one of the reasons he wanted to go is because he wanted to look each of these SEALs in the eye, because this was such a dangerous mission and the possibility of return was far from certain. He wanted to look each one of them in the eye and say, can you do this? And then he gave each of them a challenge coin. And Mullen, who had seen his share of fighting men and women over the years, said, I remember he said, these are big dudes. These are tough dudes, experienced dudes. He said, I've seen a lot of guys. These guys were really impressive. And they all looked him straight in the eye and said, we can do this mission. We can pull this off, and we're ready to go. And he was just so prepared for it. And to give you a sense of the preparation, just, you talk about, there are little details, and from April 1865, little details that haven't been told that just give you as the author so much pleasure, and I think as a reader give you so much pleasure. And the reason they went out to do a final rehearsal in Nevada was because they were going to do the entire mission. This was one of the things that McRaven insisted on. You're going to get off into a place. You're going to get onto the helicopters. The helicopters are going to be stripped because you're going to have to squeeze 12 people into each Black Hawk helicopter, and you're going to go the whole 162 miles. You're going to hug the mountains to try to evade what will be Pakistani radar. You're going to come out. You're going to land in this complex. You're going to carry out the mission. And at one point, because of the weight and the heat and all of this, they finally decide, one of his top people, that they're going to have to refuel. They're not going to, the original thought had been they'd be able to get there, land, do the mission, get back in the plane. Each way, the travel was about an hour and a half. And J.T. Thomas, one of basically his top helicopter officer, tells McRaven, you're going to have to refuel. And he's pissed about this, frankly, because he hasn't told he hasn't told Mullen, and he hasn't told the president. And this is one more complication. And McRaven is worried, every time I add something to this barrel, there's a possibility they're going to say, no, we're not going there. So McRaven says, well, look, you're going to practice the refuel, aren't you? And there's some talk about, well, we know how to refuel. And he says, no, you're going to do that. And McRaven insists on it. Well, it turns out these helicopters this is the first time they were ever used in combat. They were special stealth Black Hawk helicopters with, all kinds of slight technical changes to make it more able to evade the radar from the Pakistani air defenses. Well, lo and behold, they fly to the site, they conduct the mission, now they fly back to refuel, and it turns out, because of the configuration of the stealth helicopters, the nozzle from the refueling pod in the Chinook doesn't fit into it, and they have to jerry-rig it to make it work. And if they hadn't practiced that, they would have had to do that in the dead of night with the Pakistani air defense. So, this goes right back to McRaven's Bible about this: repetition, practice. If anything you're going to do, you practice, because if you don't practice it, there may be an unintended mistake or problem that you're just not going to have been ready for.
Okay, so if we're talking about unintended mistakes, tell us about the actual raid itself. I mean, up until now, it feels like it's something ripped not from a dusty old book in a library, but from a movie done by Jerry Bruckheimer. Tell us about the mood of the actors. For example, Obama, the night before, he went to the correspondence dinner, putting on a brave face. And then, of course, they were getting ready to carry out the raid. And then there's the raid itself. Tell us about all that.
Well, that's right. So one of the things that happens is they have a very set time they want to do this. They want to do this on the weekend of April 30th, May 1st. And that's because they finally have gotten everything ready. They're ready to go. They are concerned if they delay. First of all, they wanted to do it on the lunar cycle. So one of the times when they figured that they would have a big advantage was when there was no moonlight. They'd have night vision goggles. Al-Qaeda wouldn't. So that would give them an operational advantage on the ground. So there are these two nights, April 30th and May 1st. The other thing is that you start to get a month later into June, and it's going to be too hot because the heat is going to directly affect how much gasoline you need to get the helicopters there, and it's going to get to be too heavy. So if you don't do it on this weekend, you're probably going to have to wait till September, and now you're really risking that that bin Laden is going to somehow get word, or he'll just decide on his own. Coincidentally, I've been here at the compound too long. I got to get out of here and move. And now he's disappeared again, and you're on a, he disappears as he did for 9 years. So they're going this weekend, and somebody, they had planned for everything, but then suddenly they realized April 30th, Saturday night, that is the night of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And the president is scheduled to be there, and almost everybody in that National Security Council, like Panetta, is scheduled to be there. And that's the last thing they want to do. But people say, look, if we don't, if we cancel at the last minute, that's going to get a lot of reporters wondering what's going on. And you don't want a lot of reporters asking on an operation this secure. There's also another wonderful detail, is the president announces that to his team on Friday morning, after the big meeting on Friday the 29th, it's a go. We're going to do it. And then he gets on a plane and he flies down to South because there have been a series of tornadoes across the South. So he's gone, but the principals all have a meeting. And somebody says in this meeting, the White House Correspondents' Dinner is tomorrow, and it's going to be a problem because, we're all going to be there in black tie. And what if this goes wrong? And what if SEALs have been killed or something? And Hillary Clinton says, I'll clean this up slightly, F the White House Correspondents' Dinner. If we sit there and make national security decisions based on, black tie dinners in Washington, shame on us. And it is funny, when I interviewed her, this had come out in a couple of the stories. I was a little concerned about asking her, and when I said, did you really say? And she went, oh, yes, I said it. She wanted to own the fact that she had said it. Anyway, Obama goes, and what makes this even more dramatic, talk about a movie, is this is the night that Donald Trump is in the audience at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and this is just after Trump had been pushing the whole birther theory that Obama had been born in Kenya and was not a legitimate president. So although Obama, the last thing he wanted to do was go, he takes advantage of the speech that he makes at the dinner to roast Trump and to compare the decisions he has to make as president to the decisions that Donald Trump had to make as the host of Celebrity Apprentice, which I understand that Mr. Trump was not especially amused by. Meanwhile, the SEALs are getting ready, and Rob O'Neill is writing letters to his daughters. He's got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old daughter, but he writes letters to them as their 27 and 24-year-old selves. And I asked him, why did he do it? He said, well, they wouldn't understand at 7 and 4, but I thought this would be letters they'd have the rest of their life because I'm not coming home. And this will be a letter that says, I'm sure you've grown up and to be wonderful women, and you know, maybe you got married by now, and I am so sorry I wasn't able to walk you down the aisle. And he couldn't give them to any of his SEAL team members because he thought they were all going to get killed too. So he had to find somebody else and put them in an envelope for his daughters and for other family members saying goodbye. They get on the helicopter, and the interesting thing, you know, I was talking about how impressed I was by the SEALs. O'Neill is impressed by some of the other SEALs. They're on this hour-and-a-half trip to the compound, and O'Neill says, some of these guys fall asleep. And he says, I'm looking around at him, and I'm thinking, we are on, Black Hawk helicopters inside Pakistan, you know, trying to evade Pakistani air defenses, going into the compound where we're going to try to take out the most wanted man in the world. These guys have got to have ice water in their veins, you know, that they can fall asleep in this, but some of them did. He, on the other hand, is trying to focus. So one of the things he does, and again, you know, these are the things that make these stories so vivid, Jay. He starts counting 1, 2, all the way from 1 to 1,000. And when he gets to 1,000, he starts counting backwards. 999, 998, 997. And then for some reason, words spring into his head. America was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and America will be defended. And this was a comment that George W. Bush made that morning. And he has no idea why, but this comes into his mind, and he keeps repeating this mantra of what Bush said to the country on the morning of 9/11. They get to the compound. They go in. Because one of the helicopters crashes. If you want, I could tell that story. I'm just going to try to short circuit a little bit. They end up in the compound, and again, they have no idea what's booby-trapped here, but they think there's going to be something. And at one point, a bunch of SEALs, including O'Neill, are on the staircase from the first floor to the second floor, and they hear a young man's voice, and they believe that his teenage son, Khalid, is on the second floor, and one of the SEALs had learned in Arabic to say, hey, Khalid. And Khalid gets confused because it's dark and he doesn't know who it is, and he peeks out from behind the staircase, and they shoot him right in the head. And then they go up to the third floor, and by this point, it's a point man, the guy who's in front, and an O'Neill. And there's on the third floor, and there's a carpet that's hung in the doorway. And O'Neill, and O'Neill as the team leader, he's going to squeeze the shoulder of the point man to tell him whether to stand down or to move ahead. And he gives him the squeeze, and the point man goes in, and it turns out there are two spaces there, and he goes to his left, and there are some people up there, and he jumps on top of them because he figures that they're probably suicide bombers, and if they detonate their bombs, he will take the explosion. And O'Neill goes straight forward, and he ends up in a room, and there in the room is Osama bin Laden, 3 feet away from him.
The man who had vanished into thin air and had eluded us for over a decade, and then all of a sudden he was there.
Yeah, I said, how did he look? He said, I don't know that I registered it then, but as I thought back on it, he looked scared.
So many things could have gone wrong. And as it turned out, so many things went right. And the mission was a success. Tell us about the national reaction to what happened.
Well, the national reaction was astonishing. That night, after a lot of due diligence about, is it bin Laden? And they did facial recognition. Pace was pretty much gone because there were 3 shots in it. But, the distance between the ears and the lobes. And they didn't have the DNA results yet, but they had McRaven having measured, him against a Navy SEAL and that he was 6'4". They decide, it's bin Laden, and he's going to tell the nation, Obama is. And when he finishes the speech, and there were just the top people who had been in the Security Council meetings, like Biden, like Panetta, who'd come from the CIA, like Mullen and Gates, they're all there. And they walk outside, and they can hear, because after the announcement, they can hear a lot of kids from like GW or Georgetown or whatever had congregated at the White House outside, and they're chanting USA, USA, CIA, CIA. And Panetta says, you know, grown up during Vietnam, grown up during a lot of the times when the CIA was not in particularly good odor. He's the CIA director, and he says, to hear kids in the street chanting CIA, he said, was one of the proudest moments of my professional life. It was a national celebration. And you know, look, it didn't bring back the 3,000 people. It didn't end the war on terror, but it was the main reason we got to Afghanistan, was to take out bin Laden, to decapitate al-Qaeda, and to protect the U.S. homeland from another terror attack from Afghanistan. And it was mission accomplished.
What an extraordinary moment. It was something that could have been ripped from when World War II was over and they were celebrating the streets of New York. People were kissing each other, they were singing, they were hugging. It was really just a remarkable moment. And the same with this. Now, one question I have, and we're marching down in terms of time for our event, although I feel we could go on for several more hours.
Well, can I just say, Jay?
Yes, please.
If you don't feel you've gotten enough, you can go on Politics and Prose and you can buy the book, Countdown bin Laden, because I've left a ton of good stuff out.
I think that's right, and I'll be happy to do that. Where does the killing of bin Laden fit into history? And I tried to think about this a little bit. You know, with World War II, there was D-Day, a great turning point that broke the back of the Germans. In the Civil War, there was Gettysburg, which broke the back of the rebels. In the Cold War, there was the meeting at Hofty House in Reykjavik that broke the back of the Russians. So these are some of the critical turning points. Would you fit the killing of bin Laden as a critical turning point in the war on terror? And one thing that may make it a little murkier are recent events in Afghanistan. But where would you place it in terms of the arc of history?
Well, you know, that's why you're a better historian than I am. You know, I don't know that I have a great answer. And the answer is, it's still, even 10 years later, it's very close. I mean, is the war on terror over? No. I mean, as Joe Biden tells us, terror has metastasized. It isn't just in Afghanistan anymore. It isn't just al-Qaeda anymore. I was talking to a top person in the Pentagon who said that just last week, who said the threat to the U.S. homeland is far greater from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, from Yemen, than it is from Afghanistan. Look, the most you can say about it is that it dramatically degraded al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is the group that launched the greatest, most damaging attack on the U.S. homeland in our history. We brought justice to him. We brought the homeland from ground zero and here in Washington to Afghanistan and to this compound in Pakistan. Gary, who was, as I say, had never spoken before, the head of the Pakistan-Afghan department, he said, you know, look, a terror leader is going to be replaced by another terror leader, but that doesn't mean they're going to be as effective, as inspirational, as charismatic. He said, I've read Zawahiri, Amin al-Zawahiri, the new head of al-Qaeda's job evaluation. It's not great. So there's no question it had a dramatic effect on the war on terror and on protecting the U.S. homeland for the next 10 years. But particularly, you know, and when I wrote this book, I very much planned it to be on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I never dreamt that the Taliban would be back in control of al-Qaeda, and who knows, back in control of Afghanistan, and who knows what that means. So you can't say that this is the end of the war on terror, the end of the threat to the U.S. homeland. In fact, my guess would be exactly the opposite. But it was a very dramatic moment, and it was the signal victory in America's longest war.
Well, I'm ruminating here, which I probably shouldn't do, but it makes me think the killing of bin Laden, in a sense, in the Civil War, there was the killing of Stonewall Jackson, who was among one of the most feared and capable and able fighters that the South had. And once they lost him, it was a great body blow. And one has to think that it's probably comparable with bin Laden as well. Having lived with this book for so long, having lived with these characters, having lived with the ups and the downs, do you feel that we're too complacent now in the war on terror? Or are there things that haunt you as a result of writing this book? Give us a sense.
No, no, I don't think we're complacent, and I think we're still very concerned. I just don't know that we're as effective. I mean, there are two things that really struck me, particularly given the events. As I say, I didn't anticipate the Taliban would be in charge. One of the things about the book is, as badly as I think some of us may feel about how this war ended, we did accomplish our main mission. And I think that's something we need to recognize. The second thing is that, not to argue the policy of whether we should have stayed in Afghanistan in some form or another, that's another debate. But it's my own feeling, and I think a lot of people's feeling, that the way this was executed, the pullout, was pretty poor. And the way that the intelligence failure about the Taliban, the way the White House and the administration orchestrated it, the military getting down to 700 before they, and basically taking any kind of threat away from the Taliban, so they sweep into power, and now suddenly we got to put 5,000 or 6,000 people back in to try to get out Americans and Afghans and leave tons of equipment there for the Taliban. If as badly as that was all executed, it seems to me that Countdown bin Laden is a case study of all of it going well. The intelligence community never giving up, right, just meticulously doing everything they could to find this compound and then find out what they could about the compound. The extraordinary process that was conducted in the White House, the meetings at all kinds of levels to consider every eventuality, and then the preparation and the execution of the raid by McRaven and the special teams, special operators. And that I would say concerns me, is that's government and the various branches of government working together at their best. We certainly didn't see that in this last month, and that worries me.
We've been talking for a better part of an hour, and not once has the word partisanship been mentioned. Interesting, no?
Well, no. I mean, and in fact, it's quite the contrary, as I said. When the Republicans take over and Panetta thinks, well, now I got to brief the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, not a word, because they all understood what we're talking about here. Getting the mastermind of 9/11 is so much more important than any kind of partisan division or advantage. That was never a consideration.
All right, I think we're at the end of our hour, and I know you've got a hard stop. So I want to finish not with a question, though I still have many questions I'd love to ask. And I expect as readers rush out to get your book, they'll kind of follow up on that. But I just want to say that the book is superb, superbly rendered. It's gripping, it's vivid. It reads like it's ripped from a movie, but it also reads like solid history. It's something that, whatever else may be said, I think you should be very proud of. And I know the book's going to sell a ton of copies as well.
Well, let me just say, as the man who wrote April 1865 that got me on the idea to do this kind of form of history, I couldn't have a bigger compliment from somebody I admire more. So thank you so much, Jay.
You're welcome. Congratulations.
Great moderating, Jay. And Chris, I can't be any more effusive than Jay's been, except to say, you definitely have a knack for telling these countdown stories. To everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. A reminder that in the chat column, you can find a link for purchasing copies of Countdown bin Laden. From all of us here at Politics and Prose, stay well and well read.
Okay, Brad, nice seeing you.